Spider-Man is buried alive. Not defeated in some flashy battle, not webbed up and left for the police. Buried 6 feet under, while the man who put him there puts on his mask and starts living his life for him. This is the story of Kraven's Last Hunt, widely considered the single greatest Spider-Man story ever written, and it doesn't play like a superhero comic at all. It plays like a psychological horror film. The story opens with Sergei Kravenov, Kraven the Hunter, a man who has spent decades of his life obsessed with proving himself the greatest hunter alive, and who has failed, over and over, to actually beat Spider-Man in any meaningful way. By this point in his life, Kraven is old. He's tired. He's watched younger, flashier villains steal the spotlight, while his own reputation as a serious threat has quietly faded. And more than anything, he's haunted by the fact that no matter how many times he's fought Spider-Man, he has never once truly defeated him, not permanently, not in a way that mattered. Kraven comes from a wealthy Russian noble family that lost everything after the revolution, and much of his life has been shaped by that loss, a desperate, almost mystical need to reclaim a sense of greatness that history took away from him. Over the years he's used strange herbal potions passed down through his own personal rituals, brews that grant him enhanced strength, speed, and senses beyond a normal human's limits. He's never needed a costume or a secret identity the way most of his enemies have. His entire persona is built on being exactly what he appears to be, a hunter, stripped down to something almost primal, chasing the one prize that's always eluded him. So Kraven decides this will be his final hunt. Not a fight to the death in the traditional sense, something far stranger and far more calculated. He doesn't want to kill Spider-Man outright. Killing him would be easy, and worse, it would be meaningless. What Kraven actually wants is to prove, once and for all, that he is superior to Spider-Man in every possible way, physically, mentally, spiritually. And to do that, he comes up with a plan that's less about combat and more about complete psychological domination. Kraven ambushes Peter Parker and shoots him with a specially designed tranquilizer round, powerful enough to drop him almost instantly. While Peter is unconscious, Kraven doesn't finish him off. Instead, he buries him alive in a shallow grave in the middle of a cemetery, confident that the fall from the tranquilizer combined with the burial will be more than enough to keep him there. And then, in one of the most unsettling character choices in Marvel history, Kraven puts on a version of Spider-Man's costume and takes to the streets of New York as him. This is where the story becomes something genuinely different from a typical villain plot. Kraven isn't trying to frame Spider-Man for crimes or ruin his reputation. He's trying to become him, to prove that he can do everything Spider-Man does, and do it better, more brutally, more effectively. He starts patrolling the city as Spider-Man, taking down criminals with a level of violence that Peter never would have used, breaking bones, terrifying people, pushing every encounter to the edge of what a hero should be willing to do. At one point, Kraven captures one of Spider-Man's most dangerous recurring enemies, a monstrous creature called Vermin, someone Peter himself has struggled to defeat safely in the past. Vermin was once an ordinary man, experimented on and transformed into something feral and rat-like, driven by instincts he can barely control, and even Spider-Man has had to be careful in past encounters, wary of the sheer unpredictability of what Vermin might do next. Kraven doesn't just capture him, he beats him into submission through sheer overwhelming force, dragging him back to Spider-Man's apartment, and leaving him bound there as a kind of trophy, a message. Look what I can do. Look what your way of doing things could never accomplish. Meanwhile, Peter Parker is exactly where Kraven left him, buried alive, unconscious, running out of air in the dark. When he finally wakes up, disoriented and terrified, he has to claw his way out of his own grave with his bare hands, gasping for air the moment he breaks through the surface. It's one of the most visceral, horrifying sequences ever put into a mainstream superhero comic, not because of gore or violence, but because of the sheer primal terror of waking up buried alive and not immediately knowing why, or how long you've been down there. For a brief, disorienting moment, Peter doesn't even know if he's still alive or if this is some kind of afterlife, clawing blindly through dirt with no idea which direction leads up. Once Peter claws his way out, he has to piece together what's happened, and the horror only deepens from there. Someone has been wearing his costume. Someone has been out in the city, doing things in his name, and he has no idea for how long or how far it's gone. He returns to his apartment to find Vermin bound and half broken on his own floor, and slowly starts to understand the scale of what Kraven has actually done to him, not just physically attacking him, but stealing his identity and using it as a weapon. Even his own physical state betrays how long he's actually been gone. Days of missed meals, a body running on nothing but adrenaline and fear, weak in a way he's never allowed himself to be while wearing the mask. What makes Kraven's motivation so different from a typical villain is that this was never really about hatred for Spider-Man. If anything, there's a strange, twisted respect buried underneath everything Kraven does. He doesn't see Spider-Man as an enemy to be erased from existence. He sees him as the one measuring stick against which his entire life's worth has been judged, and found lacking, over and over again. Defeating him, symbolically and completely, is the only thing that can restore meaning to a life Kraven feels is already ending. Throughout the story, Kraven reflects on his own mortality constantly, not with fear, but with a strange, almost peaceful acceptance, as if he's already decided how this is going to end long before the reader ever finds out. And that's exactly what happens once Kraven believes he's accomplished his goal. After proving to himself that he can be Spider-Man, that he can do everything Peter does, and with more ruthless efficiency, Kraven doesn't wait around for a final showdown to determine a winner. He's not interested in winning a fight against Peter Parker. As far as he's concerned, he's already won the only fight that mattered. He returns to his own home, removes the Spider-Man costume, sets it aside, and takes his own life. This is the twist that makes Kraven's last hunt so unlike anything else in the genre. The villain doesn't lose in a climactic battle. He wins, by his own definition, and then chooses to end his life at the peak of that victory, because for Kraven, there's nowhere left to go from here. He proved what he needed to prove. Everything after that would only diminish it. There's no confrontation left to have, no rematch to lose. The absence of a final fight is the entire point. Kraven denies Peter, and the reader, the satisfaction of a traditional resolution, because giving Peter that fight would mean admitting the outcome was still in question. When Peter finally tracks Kraven down, expecting a final confrontation, he instead finds a dead man and a story that's already over. A villain who accomplished exactly what he set out to do, and who never intended to survive his own success. It leaves Peter in a strange, unresolved place emotionally. There's no satisfying victory here, no moment where he beats the villain and proves himself the stronger man. Kraven never gave him that chance, because Kraven was never actually fighting him in a way that combat could resolve. The story doesn't end there, though. Not long after Kraven's death, Vermin escapes captivity and becomes an active threat again, and Peter is forced to confront him directly, not as a way of avenging what happened to him, but as a way of finally reclaiming his own identity as Spider-Man after weeks of having it stolen and worn by someone else. This final fight isn't really about Vermin at all. It's about Peter proving to himself, quietly and without an audience, that he's still capable of being who he is, on his own terms, without needing to answer Kraven's twisted challenge in the way Kraven wanted him to. It's a smaller, quieter confrontation than anything Kraven staged, and that contrast is deliberate. Peter reclaims his identity not through spectacle, but through simply choosing, once again, to be Spider-Man when it matters. What's remarkable about this arc, even decades later, is how little of it actually revolves around a traditional physical battle between hero and villain. Spider-Man spends a huge portion of the story unconscious, buried, or recovering. Kraven spends most of his own arc not fighting Spider-Man at all, but performing an elaborate, almost theatrical impersonation of him. The real conflict of the story is entirely internal, Kraven's lifelong crisis of meaning, and Peter's quiet horror at realizing how easily his identity could be stripped away and worn by someone else while he was helpless to stop it. There's also something genuinely unsettling about how competent Kraven is throughout this story. He isn't a joke. He isn't outsmarted or made to look foolish the way villains sometimes are in order to make the hero look better by comparison. Every part of his plan works exactly as intended, right up until the very end, which he always controlled anyway. In a genre where villains typically lose because of some flaw or mistake, Kraven's story ends because he chose for it to end, on his own terms, having gotten precisely what he wanted. That's part of why this story has endured as one of the most respected Spider-Man arcs ever published. It doesn't ask who's stronger in a fight. It asks something much harder to answer: what does it actually mean to defeat someone, and is winning even the same thing as being right? Kraven believed, until his very last moment, that becoming Spider-Man better than Spider-Man himself was the ultimate victory. Whether that belief was true or not is left almost entirely up to the reader, because Peter himself never really gets the chance to argue against it directly. He just has to live with what was taken from him, and slowly build himself back from a hole in the ground that was never supposed to have an exit. Looking back at Kraven's last hunt now, it holds up not because of spectacle, but because of restraint. There are no giant set-piece battles, no city-wide threats, no world-ending stakes. Just one broken, obsessive man's final attempt to matter, and one hero forced to claw his way back, literally, from being erased entirely. It remains one of the few superhero stories where the villain's plan isn't stopped. It simply runs its course, exactly as designed, and the hero is left to pick up the pieces of an identity that was never really his enemies to take in the first place. If you enjoyed this breakdown of one of the darkest stories ever told in Spider-Man's history, drop a like and subscribe, because next time, we're going even deeper into the Marvel Universe.